I was still holding the champagne when my father announced the cabin had been mortgaged, again, for Caleb. No one looked at me. No one said my name, but I was doing the math. Every year, every bill, every time they called me, the reliable one, then stayed silent. The glass tilted slightly in my hand, a bead of condensation trailing down my wrist. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just stood there, lips stretched into the polite shape of a smile, as the words hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Slow, thick, impossible to ignore. To new beginnings, Dad said, lifting his flute high. To our Caleb, who's finally found his calling. The room erupted into applause. My name was never spoken. It was supposed to be my night. 10 years of sacrifice, of saying no when I wanted to say yes, of watching other people live while I balanced checkbooks and shifted schedules and paid and paid and paid. 10 years of being the responsible one, the backbone, the afterthought. And now, the cabin, the one I had just finished paying off, the one I had kept afloat through recessions and layoffs and snowstorms that cracked the roof like paper, was mortgaged again. Not for a medical emergency, not to save someone, but so my cousin could become a travel influencer, so Caleb could buy a drone and a GoPro and plane tickets to Bali. The lights strung across the ceiling cast a golden glow over the faces I knew too well. Aunt June clinked her glass with Sierra, Caleb's girlfriend, who wore sequins like they were armor. My mother adjusted a serving platter with exaggerated grace, as if presentation could disguise betrayal. The lake beyond the window was still, black velvet dotted with moonlight. I used to sit on that dock as a teenager, sketching ideas for a photo series I never got to shoot. Back when I believed in fair shots and mutual effort. Back when I thought love came with equity. I took a sip of the champagne. It was too sweet. I felt the bubbles claw at my throat as I swallowed them down. "Riley," Caleb called out from across the room, his voice syrupy with self-congratulation. "This spread is amazing. You've outdone yourself, cousin." I nodded. My smile didn't move. I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. He turned back to the crowd, launching into a story about brand deals and engagement rates, dropping names of influencers he'd messaged once and now referred to as friends. Sierra laughed too loudly. Someone asked what his first destination would be. I couldn't hear the answer. My ears were full of static. My mother passed behind me whispering, "It's just temporary, honey. Once his channel takes off." I didn't finish my drink. The congratulatory banner overhead sagged slightly in the middle, like it knew something wasn't right. It was misspelled. "Congratulations, Riley." But I hadn't corrected it. The gesture had mattered more than the spelling. Until now. I excused myself quietly, walked through the narrow hallway toward the guest room, and closed the door behind me. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and lavender sachets. The same bedspread from childhood summers remained, sun-faded and floral. I sat down on its edge, my fingers still sticky from the champagne glass, and stared at the floorboards. Each knot in the wood was familiar, like old bruises. The sound of laughter floated in from the living room. My name, once again, not among them. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder labeled Trust Documents, scrolled to the final entry, 10 years, every dollar, every receipt, every signature, and now, every reason. I locked the screen and exhaled through my teeth. Not tonight, not yet. Let them toast, let them believe. I had something better than applause. I had silence, and I had a plan. They called me reliable, like it was praise, but it was a prison. I was 16 when Grandpa died. The funeral was quiet, respectful, closed casket, wooden cross, a sky that couldn't decide between rain and snow. Afterward, I sat on the porch swing while my parents argued in low voices behind the kitchen window, their silhouettes cast long and bent across the curtains. That night, I overheard the word foreclosure for the first time. 2 weeks later, I picked up my first job at the diner off Route 7. After that came shifts at the library, then weekends at the hardware store. I dropped cross-country, dropped debate, dropped any illusion that someone else would step in. The cabin needed saving, and apparently, I was the one meant to do it. Caleb got moved to private school that same winter. He needs a place that understands him, Mom said. He'd failed biology twice, but could explain the golden hour like a cinematographer. He's just wired differently, Dad added, as if that justified a tuition bill bigger than our mortgage. I watched him leave in the mornings in his tailored uniform, earbuds in, filming skateboarding shots on the front path. I left for my shift in an oversized parka that still smelled like Grandpa's cedar chest. They called him a visionary, sensitive, gifted. I was just strong enough to pick up the slack, strong enough not to ask why I had to choose between heating oil and textbooks, strong enough to nod when Mom called me mature for my age. I wasn't mature. I was tired. I still remember standing at the bus stop before sunrise, the kind of cold that burned through layers. My gloves had holes. My boots leaked at the seams. I'd scroll through Caleb's latest Instagram posts on my cracked phone screen, angles of sky and water, some girl in a knit hat silhouetted against the cabin dock, hundreds of likes, comments calling him an old soul, a future filmmaker. Meanwhile, I was calculating interest payments on a yellow legal pad in the diner's supply closet during breaks. I got accepted to a state college, not a big-name school, but it had a decent photography program. I never told anyone. I knew we couldn't afford it. The acceptance letter stayed folded in the back of my sock drawer for years, edges worn soft with time. I kept it, like a ghost of the life I might have had if I'd just let the cabin go. Some nights, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, I'd creep downstairs and flip through Grandpa's old ledgers. He kept every receipt, every note. He believed in tracking the truth. That's when I started doing the same, logging every payment I made, every repair, every bill. At first it felt like control. Later it felt like insurance. No one noticed. No one asked. The lights stayed on. The taxes got paid. Caleb filmed on the weekends, and I worked. They said I was dependable. What they meant was invisible. And the funny thing is, I believed them. I let that word, reliable, wrap around my shoulders like a medal. I wore it like armor, not realizing it was also a muzzle. And every time I bit back the resentment, every time I told myself it was okay, I tucked the feeling deeper, sealed it into the silence. But silence is a strange thing. If you stack it long enough, it starts to make a sound of its own. And mine was growing louder. The mortgage was signed 3 weeks after my final payment, behind my back. It wasn't a confession. It was a casual afterthought over reheated lasagna and lukewarm small talk. Dad said it like he was commenting on the weather. We had to strike while the market was good, he said, setting his fork down with the clink of stainless steel on ceramic. The cabin had equity I built, 10 years of skipped vacations, skipped meals, skipped life. Mom added her part with a soft smile, as if that would cushion the blow. Caleb's got momentum now. He just needs a little launch. A little launch. I stared at them. The words formed in my mouth but stopped behind clenched teeth. You didn't think to tell me? Mom's expression fluttered, part guilt, part denial, all performance. We didn't want to stress you out. You've already done so much. We thought you'd understand. The refrigerator hummed in the background, low and ceaseless, like an engine that refused to die. Dad cleared his throat. It's not like we're selling the place. It's just a loan. Caleb has a plan. In the living room, Caleb laughed loudly. Bali has insane lighting at sunrise, he said to Sierra, who murmured something back before dissolving into a high-pitched giggle. They were seated on the couch with his laptop open between them, flipping through Pinterest boards and influencer reels. I caught a glimpse of a mock-up logo on the screen. Wander Caleb in gold font. I pushed my plate away. My appetite had vanished, replaced by something sharp and metallic in the back of my throat. I felt my pulse in my fingers. Dad glanced at me, clearly annoyed that I wasn't clapping for their big reveal. We're all family, Riley. We all contribute in our own way. Some of us more than others. I said, barely louder than the hum. He stiffened. Mom looked away. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped the floor with a sound that felt louder than anything anyone had said that night. I didn't make a scene. I didn't shout. That would have given them the upper hand, the chance to say I was overreacting, being ungrateful. I wouldn't give them that. Instead, I walked upstairs to the guest room, the same one I slept in as a kid, when the power went out. Or Grandpa's cough got bad. It hadn't changed. The wallpaper still peeled at the corners. The ceiling still had that hairline crack, stretching like a branch in winter. I lay on my back and stared at it, listening to the muffled sounds of Caleb explaining content strategy and Sierra asking if Bali had Whole Foods. My eyes burned, not from tears. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in years. I thought about all the hours I'd logged, behind counters, under fluorescent lights, on snowy sidewalks with aching feet. I thought about my name not being on that mortgage, not even as a courtesy. And I thought about the word understand. They always used it like a command, as if I were the emotional shock absorber for everyone else's dreams, as if I existed to make space. Outside, the lake whispered against the shore, soft and indifferent. I closed my eyes. They'd made a mistake. Not the mortgage, though that was bad enough. Their real mistake was believing I would stay quiet forever. Trevor didn't ask questions. He just said, "You're ready." It was early Monday morning when I stepped into his office, the kind of morning that smelled like frost and turned your breath to steam before you made it to the door. I hadn't slept. I didn't need to. Clarity has a way of keeping you upright, even when your body wants to fold. His office looked the same as always, neat, quiet, professional, oak paneling, a bookshelf lined with legal volumes that hadn't been cracked in years. The air held the faint bitterness of burnt coffee and something older, leather maybe, time. I slid the folder across the desk, not a thick one, but dense enough. Trevor opened it with the same calm he'd shown the first time I called him 5 years ago. Back then, I was just a girl with too many bills and a gut feeling she needed protection. Today, I was the owner of a paper trail that could end 100 lies. "Everything's in here?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "Every deposit, every repair receipt, every notarized transfer," I said. Every single thing they didn't care to notice. He nodded slowly. You've been meticulous. I had to be. Outside the window, people passed with coffee cups and phone screens and lives that probably didn't revolve around family, betrayal. I envied them for a moment. Then I remembered how many people walk into betrayals smiling, unprepared. That used to be me. It wouldn't be again. Trevor tapped a page gently. You want me to activate the trust? Yes. And send the letters to the mortgage lender, my parents, and Caleb. I want them notified before the weekend. He studied me for a second longer than necessary. You sure you want to do this, Riley? Once this goes into motion, it already is. Silence settled between us, thick and final. He began organizing the documents, sliding them into fresh envelopes, printing out certified mail labels. As he worked, I reached into my tote bag, searching for my phone, and my fingers brushed something cold and familiar. My camera, old, scratched, heavier than I remembered. I hadn't touched it in years. It had lived at the bottom of my bag, like a relic from a life I used to dream of. I held it for a moment, thumb resting against the shutter. It didn't turn on. The battery had long since died. I remembered the day I bought it, 2 weeks after getting accepted to the state photography program. I was 17 and certain that art could save people. Then the furnace broke. Then the car died. Then Caleb had a crisis. I sold the lens first, then the lights. Eventually, I just stopped bringing it out, but I never threw it away. Something wrong? Trevor asked, glancing up. No, I said, setting the camera beside the coffee he hadn't touched. Just remembering who I used to be. He nodded. We'll have confirmation of delivery by end of day, Wednesday. You'll get copies of the letters. The mortgage is void. Your parents weren't legal co-owners. They had no authority. I know. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. The rage had burned off somewhere around year 7. What was left was something colder, harder, like ice that had learned how to cut. Trevor folded his hands. This isn't just legal, Riley. This is personal. It always has been, I said, standing. As I walked out, I didn't look back at the folder or the camera or the man who had helped me build a paper fortress around my pain. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already in motion. Some letters aren't meant to be opened. Some are meant to arrive at just the right time, when silence is no longer enough. When the calls came, I let them ring. Monday morning broke clear and cold, the kind of air that made everything feel sharper, more deliberate. I chose a corner booth at the cafe near City Hall, the one with creaky floors and the best burnt-edge cinnamon rolls in the county. I ordered black coffee and nothing else. Appetite felt like a luxury I hadn't earned yet. The barista called my name. I picked up the mug and sat by the window, the one that faced the narrow street where the leaves twisted and scraped in the wind like they had secrets to carry. The letters had gone out at 8 a.m., sharp, to the bank. Notification that the new mortgage was invalid, filed fraudulently, and that the deed, held through a trust, belonged solely to me, to my parents, a courteous summary of legal facts, delivered by certified mail, no sentiment attached. To Caleb, a personal copy addressed to the apartment he still shared with Sierra, along with a breakdown of how his launch was legally built on property that was never his. Trevor had sent me the tracking confirmations. I hadn't responded. There was nothing left to say. I watched a mother outside struggle with a stroller. She looked exhausted in a way I recognized. I almost got up to help, but then I remembered I'd spent a decade helping, always helping, always the first to step in, to stay late, to keep things afloat. Now I stayed seated. At 9:43 a.m., my phone buzzed. Dad, I didn't answer. At 10:05, Mom, I let it go to voicemail. By 10:12, Caleb called, twice. Then a text, we need to talk. What did you do? I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the spoon clink against the porcelain. A calm rhythm, no urgency. I opened Instagram on silent and scrolled without looking. Caleb had posted a video 2 days ago, all sunlight and ambition, him and Sierra waving from a balcony with a caption about chasing dreams and leaving behind what no longer serves you. This morning his face was missing. Instead, Sierra had posted one of those grayscale selfies with a quote overlay. Sometimes the ones you trust the most are the first to betray you. I took another sip of coffee. The comment section was already unraveling. Followers asking what happened, sponsors tagging and untagging. The momentum he'd counted on, it was shifting, fast. By noon, I walked the long block back toward the parking structure. On impulse, I took a detour, drove by the cabin. Just once, just to look. The banner was still up in the window. Congratulations, Riley. Misspelled, crooked, cheap plastic flapping gently in the wind, like it still believed the night it was hung had meant something. The irony didn't even sting. Not anymore. I parked across the road, engine still running, and watched the stillness of the porch. Nobody came out. Maybe they hadn't opened the letter yet. Maybe they had and were still scrambling for ways to undo what couldn't be undone. The leaves had begun to pile near the front steps. No one had swept them. A squirrel darted across the driveway, pausing to sniff at a crumpled shipping box near the front door. Probably Caleb's new vlogging rig, still in the packaging, untouched. I leaned back in the driver's seat and let the silence expand until it filled the whole car. It was different now, no longer the silence of suppression, but the silence of control, the kind that came when you finally held the reins, when your voice wasn't being ignored, but reserved, because silence, wielded correctly, is louder than any speech, more brutal than any scream. I watched the cabin for a while longer. Then I drove away, not with satisfaction, not with vengeance burning in my chest, but with a quiet certainty that something had finally shifted and there would be no going back. I walked back into the cabin with my folder of proof and a decade of silence. They were already there, just like I expected. Dad pacing near the fireplace, arms folded tight across his chest, his jaw grinding the way it always did when he felt cornered. Mom sat rigid on the far end of the sofa, her fingers twisted together in her lap, knuckles pale. Caleb slouched in the armchair wearing a hoodie, too clean to match the chaos he'd caused. His eyes fixed on some invisible point on the carpet. Sierra was nowhere to be seen. I didn't ask. I set the folder down on the coffee table with a quiet, deliberate motion. The sound of it hitting the wood was soft, but it changed the air in the room. Like a pistol laid gently between old friends, Dad was the first to speak. You've made your point. No, I said, opening the folder. I'm just getting started. I pulled out the documents, dated copies of every payment, every bank transfer, notarized trust agreements with their signatures in ink they never bothered to read. I spoke in measured tones, each sentence precise, unshaken. You sign these. Every check is traceable. Every invoice matches a withdrawal. Every repair paid out of my account. The mortgage filed fraudulently. The bank has confirmed it. The cabin is mine, legally, entirely. Caleb scoffed. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I looked at him, really looked. His face was pale, lips dry, hoodie sleeves pulled over his fists like a child hiding from consequence. You're not a victim, I said calmly. You're a beneficiary. Mom's voice cracked as she finally spoke. Riley, please, we're family. We didn't mean to what, I cut in. To steal? To dismiss? To pretend I didn't exist while you bet everything I built on Caleb's next big idea? Dad stepped forward, his voice rising. We were trying to help your cousin succeed. Sometimes risks have to be taken. Not with my sacrifices, I said. Not without my consent. He slapped his hand on the table, the folder shifting from the impact. We raised you better than this. That made me laugh, low and bitter. Number you raised me to believe being silent was noble. That being useful meant being unseen. But you didn't raise me to be stupid. Behind them, a photo frame tilted on the mantel. For a moment, it teetered in place, then fell, glass shattering against the hearth. None of them moved. The picture had been of all of us, Christmas maybe, or someone's graduation. I'd been the one holding the camera, always behind it, always documenting, never included. Nobody said a word. I let the silence stretch. I could feel them unraveling, each in their own way. Dad retreating into anger, Mom curling into guilt, Caleb sulking under the weight of his own irrelevance. But I was stone. I'm not here to argue, I said. I came to tell you where things stand. 30 days, then I want you out. Mom gasped. You can't. I can, and I am. I gathered the documents slow and clean, slid them back into the folder like closing a coffin. I gave you 10 years. I gave you everything, and you gave it to him. Caleb stood up suddenly. You're gonna regret this, Riley. I tilted my head. That's the difference between us, Caleb. I already have. And with that, I turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind the wreckage they made, and the proof that I no longer had to live in it. You're just like Aunt Rachel, Mom spat, and the room went quiet. She said it like a curse, like a stain I should scrub from my soul. But the silence that followed spoke louder than her words. Dad looked at the floor. Caleb blinked. Even the wind outside the cabin seemed to pause, as if the name itself had weight. Rachel, the name they never said. Not during holidays, not in passing. A ghost with no obituary. But I remembered her, barely. Red hair, sharp voice. She used to send me postcards with birds on them. Messages in tidy, looping cursive that stopped coming when I turned 9. Later that night, I texted Jordan, my cousin on the other side of the family. We hadn't spoken in months, but she answered within seconds. You really want to know about Rachel? Yes. She didn't disappear. She escaped. We met at a little bar tucked between a gas station and a thrift shop. The kind of place where the bartender didn't ask questions and the lights were dim enough to keep things buried. Jordan ordered whiskey. I stuck with water. The story didn't need alcohol to sting. Rachel, it turned out, once ran the family business, a construction firm my grandfather built from nothing. When he passed, she kept it running, while her siblings spun in circles of indecision. They didn't like taking orders from the difficult sister, so they turned on her, claimed she manipulated the will, sued her, tried to erase her. She dissolved the company overnight, left them with nothing but bitterness and blame. She mailed them their severance checks with a single line, Jordan said, pushing the glass in a slow circle. You wanted me gone. Consider it granted. Then she vanished. Arizona, I think. Sedona. I nodded slowly, the name blooming in my mind, like a seed that had been buried a long time. I remembered a return address years ago. Desert colors. The smell of sagebrush. I booked the flight the next morning. Rachel lived in a modest adobe house tucked against red rock cliffs, surrounded by cactus and sky. Her front door was painted a chipped shade of turquoise, and wind chimes made of old keys clinked in the breeze. She opened the door without a smile, but her eyes were sharp, scanning. "You're Riley," she said, not a question. "I'm told I'm just like you." That made her laugh, a low, rusted sound that scraped something loose inside me. She stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like coffee and old paper. The walls were lined with books and art that felt unapologetically hers. Sun-washed, angular, bold. She moved slowly but deliberately, like someone who had nothing left to prove. "You brought the folder," she said, nodding toward the documents under my arm. "Good." She poured black coffee into mismatched mugs. No cream, no sugar. "They never expect the quiet ones to keep records," she said, setting the mug down beside a thick file stamped with legal letterhead. Her name, printed clean across the top, beside an old family crest someone had tried to scrub from memory. Her folders looked a lot like mine. We sat across from each other, years apart, but stitched together by the same thread of betrayal and ledger lines. "They painted you as bitter," I said. "They always do, when you don't play along." I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, nearly burnt, perfect. "What did it cost you?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, just looked out the window at the jagged cliffs beyond the yard. "Everything," she said finally, "and not nearly enough." I stayed until sunset. We didn't talk much after that. Some truths don't need explanation, just recognition. Before I left, she handed me a smaller file, not about the business, but about the people. Letters, old statements, patterns repeating themselves over decades. "They'll say you turned your back on family," she told me at the door. "Let them. You're not turning your back. You're just walking forward." The desert air wrapped around me as I stepped off her porch. Dry, endless, honest. For the first time, I understood that revenge didn't always roar. Sometimes it wrote itself in black ink and silence. And when done right, it didn't destroy you. It freed you. "Sign these, or I make this federal." The words hung in the cabin like a gunshot that hadn't been fired yet, but everyone could hear the click of the safety being switched off. I stood at the center of the living room. The coffee table cleared now, except for the manila envelope I placed down, like a dealer laying her final hand. The contract was simple. Relinquish all claims to the property, acknowledge the trust, accept the quiet, and walk away. Dad's face turned the color of raw meat. "You're blackmailing your own family," he growled, fists trembling at his sides. "No," I said calmly. "I'm offering you a way out." Caleb stood in the corner, arms crossed, hoodie still pulled up like it could shield him from reality. His eyes darted between the papers and me, calculating angles. Sierra was already gone, packed out the night the sponsor emails stopped. No forwarding address. No tearful goodbye. She'd always been more smoke than substance. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, still in the cardigan she wore the night they toasted Caleb. Her eyes were glassy, her hands limp in her lap. She didn't say anything, just looked at me like she wanted to rewind time with a stare. "You pushed a fraudulent mortgage through a property you didn't legally own," I continued. "The bank is considering pressing charges. I told them to wait, that I wanted to resolve this privately. This is me being generous." Caleb slammed his hand on the windowsill. "You ruined my career." "You didn't have a career," I said. "You had a fantasy, funded by theft." "You don't get it," he snapped, stepping forward. "This cabin, this family, it means something to me." I didn't move. Not enough to protect it, not enough to respect it, certainly not enough to pay for it. He looked away, first. Dad leaned over the papers, reading with suspicion, like there might be a trap. There wasn't. I wanted them gone, not jailed. But I wanted them to remember that I could have made it worse, that the only reason they weren't facing court dates was because I decided not to become them. He signed. Mom's hand shook as she reached for the pen. Her signature trailed off at the end, like she couldn't quite bring herself to finish. Caleb signed last, slamming the pen down like it hurt. I gathered the papers and slid them back into the envelope. The thud of boxes being taped echoed from the hallway. Mila stood on the porch, watching it all through the screen door, a coffee mug steaming in her hands. "Damn," she said quietly, not unkindly. "You really did it." I nodded once. The cabin smelled like cardboard and dust, the kind of scent that clings to endings. I walked past the half-packed kitchen, the hallway closet full of neglected tools, the stairs I used to sit on when I couldn't sleep. Every corner felt smaller now, like the lies had stretched the house until it finally snapped back to size. That night, I slept in the guest room, alone. No more slammed doors, no muffled arguments, just the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the creak of the beams settling into their truth. For the first time in a long while, I didn't dream of running. I didn't dream of drowning in debt or being forgotten in a crowd of Caleb's applause. I just slept, and the silence wasn't empty. It was earned. She left the photo album on the porch, proof she had always seen me. No note, no explanation. Just the old blue faux leather cover, swollen at the spine and worn at the corners, resting on the wood like it had grown there. It was raining. A soft, persistent drizzle that made the trees blur into one another and the lake look like a sheet of glass being breathed on. I didn't bring the album inside right away. I sat with it on the porch swing, legs tucked under a fleece throw, the cracked camera beside me on the railing, lens facing out. The first page was me, maybe 17, wearing an oversized hoodie, hammering in a loose fence board out back. My hair pulled into a messy knot, no makeup, half smile, a candid from the kitchen window probably. I never knew the photo existed. Next, me carrying groceries up the gravel path in the snow, the plastic bags cutting into my hands, my breath curling in the air. Then another, asleep on the couch, a stack of tax forms slid halfway off my chest, highlighter still tucked in my fist. There were dozens of them, quiet, grainy, off-centered shots, me replacing light bulbs, me wiping down the table after everyone else had gone to bed, me with my head pressed against the cool glass of the sliding door, looking out at the lake, completely still. Mom must have taken them over the years, without asking, without telling. She saw me. She just never said it. I don't know which realization hurt more, the fact that she had seen me all along, or that she'd chosen to let everyone else pretend I was invisible. The porch swing creaked as I shifted. The rain thickened, drumming lightly on the tin gutters. The smell of wet pine and cold stone filled the air, as familiar as the breath in my chest. Page after page, I flipped slowly. My hands didn't shake, but my throat felt hollow, like someone had scooped the sound out of me and left the shape behind. There was one photo that stopped me. Me, kneeling in the mud by the foundation, trying to unclog a flooded drainage pipe. Caleb was in the background, arms crossed, watching me like I was entertainment. I remembered that day. He had laughed, called it Riley's Mud Spa. Everyone else laughed too, but someone had been behind the camera, someone who hadn't laughed. I closed the album gently. No tears came, not for them, not anymore, but maybe for me, for the version of me who kept waiting for recognition that never arrived, for the girl who believed being useful was the same as being loved. The porch light clicked on as the clouds darkened, catching on the metal clasp of the album. Inside the house, my house, the silence was steady. No footsteps, no shouting, no demands, just the tick of the hallway clock and the slow drip of rain off the roof. I reached for the camera and held it in my lap. It didn't work anymore, but the weight of it felt right. I wasn't sure what to do with the album. Keep it, burn it, bury it in the closet like the other things I didn't want to remember. I didn't decide. I just sat there, letting the rain do what it does best. Washington. And remind, some inherit homes, others inherit debt. I inherited the truth. The cabin was quiet, emptied of furniture, voices, excuses. The floors, stripped bare, creaked softly underfoot as I made my final pass through. Light spilled through the tall windows, catching dust motes midair like suspended ash. The shadows cast by the beams stretched long across the walls like memories that had finally lost their grip. The living room, where Dad used to tell stories louder than they deserved. The kitchen, where Mom folded guilt into every meal. The hallway, where Caleb once bragged about sponsorships while stepping over bills I'd paid. Every room had held something heavy, now only air. I walked slowly, touching nothing. The smell had changed. No more burnt coffee, no trace of lavender sachets. Just pine, cold, clean, raw. The kind of scent that didn't belong to anyone. In my old room, the only thing left was a thumbtack hole in the wall where a calendar used to hang. I remember circling dates, paydays, deadlines, dreams I never pursued. I stared at that wall for a long moment, then turned and didn't look back. Rachel and Jordan stood, waiting on the porch, each holding a to-go cup of coffee. Rachel's sunglasses reflected the sky. Jordan was quiet, hands in her coat pockets. Neither of them said a word as I stepped outside. They didn't need to. Across the yard, the realtor knelt near the mailbox, hammering the for sale sign into the frostbitten ground. The final sound, the punctuation mark. I stood there with the key in my hand, feeling its cold teeth press against my palm. Not heavy, just solid. I slipped it into the lock one last time and turned it. The latch clicked, not with sadness, not with sentiment, with clarity. I had saved the house. With 10 years of silence, of sacrifice, of exhaustion, no one noticed until it became leverage. Then I saved myself. Through the fine print, through quiet revenge, through a truth so sharp it didn't have to shout to cut. And now it was time to let it go. I walked down the steps and joined them on the gravel path. The wind picked up gently, lifting my hair off my shoulders. The lake in the distance was calm, silver blue and still. I thought about all the mornings I watched it while others slept. The sunrises I measured in unpaid hours. The nights I asked myself if any of it would ever mean something. It did now. Rachel reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "From your mother," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I took it but didn't open it. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Lunch?" Jordan asked, her voice careful. I nodded. We walked toward the car, 3 women who had each been told in different ways to stay small, to stay quiet. None of us had. At the end of the driveway, I looked back once. The cabin stood as it always had, but this time it didn't own me. The truth had been ugly, yes, but it had also been mine, and finally, that was enough. Some wounds aren't loud. They don't scream or bleed out in front of everyone. Some just sit inside you for years, quietly shifting the way you carry yourself, the way you say yes when you mean no, the way you shrink so others can spread out. There's a certain kind of betrayal that doesn't come with slammed doors or cruel words. It comes with expectations, with being the one who always understands, the one who always stays. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop being that person, to draw a line, not in anger, but in clarity. There's a cost to choosing yourself after years of choosing others. It's not neat, it's not easy, but it's necessary, because love that demands your silence isn't love, it's leverage. And when you finally reclaim your voice, not to shout, but to speak plainly, calmly, with receipts and a steady hand, it doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like truth finally standing up straight. We don't owe our loyalty to the people who only loved us for what we gave them. We owe it to the parts of ourselves we buried just to keep the peace. Eventually, even the quietest person learns that silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of choice. And when you make that choice, make it like closing a door with the sunrise at your back and the keys still warm in your palm. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt overlooked, used, or quietly taken for granted, please know you're not alone. So many of us have carried more than we were ever meant to, simply because we were the ones who could. If you've been there, or if you're still there, I'd be honored to hear your story in the comments. This is a space for the quiet fighters, the ones who love deeply and draw their boundaries just as fiercely. And if you'd like more stories that speak to that strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be powerful, you're welcome to like, share, or subscribe, only if it feels right. Until next time, take care of yourself the way you've always taken care of everyone else. You've earned that peace.